Welcome viewers. For this video I will be elaborating on squad upgrades, starting positions, and talk a little bit about blocking. All these topics are important for successful playthroughs and a smooth time playing the game, and I feel that they are not very well discussed in general. One thing you may notice is that I use the colorblind setting. This is because it shows alpha enemies with a double chevron, which really helps out spotting them quickly so I can make better moves. I suggest you do the same. After all, you want to have fun with this game, having a good time without falling back to grid defense to save your day. FTL has a certain peculiar habit of suddenly introducing you to really scary enemies at random times, and Into the Breach does that too, so it's important to have this stuff figured out so you're ready for it. You may notice that some pilots or squads are missing. This is because a near future update is not yet in my hands to go over, but I'm very excited for this update and hope that many of you will enjoy it too and find this video a useful refresher or guide. Where I can't speak of the future, I'm hoping that these same practices will carry over for the most part. I went over the standard pilots in my steel judoka video. Check that out if you have not, as it goes over my feelings concerning the pilots. Remember that the more options you have on any one mech, the more likely you're going to be able to respond to any one scenario. See how this ice mech has 3 options available: a 4-sided push, freeze, self and target, and a rocket artillery that when fully upgraded is nothing to snicker at and can make defensive smoke. So technically 4 options are available. That is outstanding. Let's get right to the squad upgrades. We will start with the Riftwalkers, the first squad you play. It's a pretty solid, no tricks, no fancy schmancy stuff going on for it. It is a fairly predictable and reliable squad. The first thing I upgrade on the squad with the power core from the first island is movement on the artillery. The reason is that the artillery is very important for the squad, and 3 movement as default is not enough for him to get to where he needs to be to do what he needs to do. A lot of people like to instead push for buildings immune. I do not recommend this, and I've found from many playthroughs that buildings immune is good, but it's not that critical and you can skimp on it for a while. If you don't believe me, try this exercise. Run without buildings immune until the start of Island 4 for a few runs and see how well you do. You'll be fine for the most part. Upon completion of the first island, the 3 power cores that are then available are then dumped into the damage upgrade for the prime. The reason is that having 4 base damage plus 1 additional push damage can easily kill all normal enemies and almost all alpha enemies, while severely damaging boss enemies like the boss Firefly and bot leader. He tends to get a lot of kills, so a pilot that rolls movement upgrade should probably take the pilot seat to allow him to get to where he needs to be, as 4 damage and 4 movement is solid and reliable. A defensive option such as smoke drop or some kind of alternate damage weapon like a vice fist is a good idea. From the rewards from the second island, I dump power into the damage upgrade for the artillery so he can be a lot more useful. Good upgrades on him include an acid tank, smoke drop, missile barrage, and so on. The usual. The weak point of the Riftwalkers is the Brute, who suffers for damage and isn't all that great. For this reason, Malfan the Zoltan is my favorite choice, but I will also take Herald with +2 hit points and +1 reactor, stealing the first power core from the first island to dump into damage for the cannon, but you could also use Archimedes. My favorite secondary weapon for him is boosters. You can use it offensively or defensively, costs no power, goes on any mech without penalty, and has no limits on use. Camellia is by far my favorite prime mech pilot for ignoring spiders, leapers, and scorpions and turning the tables on them. Dash is a late game upgrade that is only worth upgrading after everything else has already been taken care of. We then move right along to the Rusting Hulks. A favorite of many players who play on hard, it's a great squad that can be a lot of fun. By the way, a custom squad with triple rocket mech with Herald for defensive utility can be a lot of fun. Anyways, with the first power core upgrade from the first island, I dump into the shield upgrade on the pulse mech. With Kazaklapeth in that seat, it becomes an excellent sidekick mech that can do damage, spawn block nearly indefinitely, and has defensive options with the repulse device. But if you don't have Kazaklapeth, then Archimedes can pass for a while. Add something else like a light tank and you're set. When the first island is done, I sink the 3 power cores into movement for the artillery and the first damage upgrade. At some point the pilot should roll movement or hit point upgrade. I may swap pilots with a jet mech because the jet mech has great range but can't really block much, so he desperately needs a hit point upgrade. At the end of the second island, the jet mech should have the range upgrade on the area bombs and storm generator should be moved to the jet mech. A good secondary weapon I like a lot for the rocket mech is Vulcan artillery to provide utility movement options without destroying buildings and is also cheap. It's a fun squad, and if you find Camellia in a pod or mission rewards, you should be going into the jet mech whether or not she has grid defense. Her web immunity and smoke immunity is too good to pass up. Archimedes or Herald are excellent rocket mech pilots. Feel free to use an off-class weapon like a burst beam on the pulse mech. Even when off-class, it only uses 2 power, yet has 3+ damage output, which is a good deal. The Zenith guard is a solid guard, but suffers from weak defense mech, issues with the brute health, and a prime weapon that can often damage things it shouldn't. Using Abe in the charge mech means he takes 0 damage from attacking, and using Kazaklopeth the Mantis in the defense mech brings some much needed damage to relieve pressure on the charge mech. And Herald can help out in some capacity too, so there are some good time traveler choices. The first power core should go into mech hit points for the brute so he doesn't have to repair every other turn to avoid dying. If the prime pilot rolls a hit point bonus, then swapping him into the brute is a good idea. When the first island is done, the 3 power cores are up to you and what to do with them. Dumping power into the charge mech or upgrading the brute movement, prime movement, and defense mech hit points would all be reasonable, as then they can move to where they need to be most effective, but also allows the defense mech to block. Boosters on the brute for upgrades allows for defensive options, while some kind of defense option or alternative damage weapon on the prime is prudent. When the battlefield gets a little busy, sometimes you need an area of effect weapons to clear everything out, and the Blitzkrieg squad is good at clearing things out. However, they're also not very good at defensive tasks, like protecting satellite launch pads, train missions, guarding friendly tanks, bombs, and stuff like that. The brute tends to be useless most of the time, so sticking Kazaklopeth or Herald provides him with more options. The first power core should go into building chain on the prime. This lets him zap things through buildings. At the conclusion of the first island, dumping the 3 power cores into movement and the first upgrade on the artillery is my usual practice. Damage upgrade on the prime follows the end of the second island. Because of the fact that this is more of a damage focused squad, defensive options are a must in all mechs where possible. Smoke drop on the prime is solid, some kind of damage or utility option on the brute besides the grappling hook, and something like Vulcan artillery for the boulder mech is what I prefer. Avoid missions where possible concerning protecting or guarding friendly elements until alternate defensive options are available. One other thing that is rather important is that the hook mech often needs to get hit point upgrades because he is commonly used as a bridge for lightning. Don't be afraid to off-class a prime weapon onto him. It doesn't really cost all that much for certain ones, and the extra damage and or utility is more than worth it. His grappling hook is rather limited in its utility, so using Herald or the Mantis really helps him be more useful on the board and gives him more options. You'll find you want to keep him up front to bait enemies with and help him to at least do something like block. The steel judoka I covered pretty thoroughly in another video, but for completeness sake I'll briefly include them here. First power core should go into movement for the artillery, and make a race between the prime and artillery to see who rolls an upgrade that is not grid defense. Then put that pilot into the artillery, whereby you should have 4 movement and 4 hit points if possible. First 3 power cores are dumped into upgrading the artillery to the max, borrowing the supply pod power core for a moment to allow the artillery to be effective. Get a solid prime damage weapon like Rocket Fist or Burst Beam for the prime at all costs. Use Mantis, Herald, or Archimedes as your time traveler in the gravity mech. Keep an eye out for the Force Amp upgrade. Refer to my other video for expanded discussion on this subject. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to light everything on fire and wait for the results to come in. That's a specialty of the flame behemoths, and they are great at area denial, positioning, and control of the vex. They are not good with damage, so using Kazakhlapeth in the swap mech really helps them out a lot. The first power core, I recommend getting the range upgrade on the flamethrower, which surprisingly has a lot of utility. When the first island is completed, I recommend sticking the first 3 cores into movement on the artillery and range on the teleporter, as it tends to carry the team. Because the squad lacks on damage initially, try to avoid destroy the dam missions, kill 7 enemies missions, and high threat level missions as they struggle to keep up in the damage race. A solid offensive prime weapon such as a rock launcher or titan fist is a good idea, and rocket artillery fits well into the meteor mech. I do not recommend the damage upgrade on the meteor mech. If you have Kazakhlapeth or Herald in the swap mech, put flame shielding on the swap mech when convenient. Pretty light spawn squares to allow for an easier time. If lighting everything on fire is not working out so well all the time, then maybe the opposite could fix it. The Frozen Titans are an interesting squad, and the description fits them aptly. They are a little tricky to use by reason of the brute and the artillery mech, but they're manageable. First power core goes into damage upgrade on the mirror mech. This helps them be a lot more useful. At the conclusion of the first island, I recommend the shield upgrade on the prime, movement, and hit points upgrades on the brute. He likes to be in spots that allow him to shoot in 2 directions without causing damage to friendlies, ideally 4 directions, so the hit point upgrade lets him sit up front where he's much less of a liability. Boosters are an excellent upgrade for him. A solid time travel choice would be Herald for push effect, which is remarkably useful in the ice mech, followed by Kazakhlapeth, which helps out with damage and can use the ice mech in an offensive fashion. A lot of people like to use Mafan the Zoltan. This works until you get overwhelmed by the lack of damage output and can't make up for lost time. Mafan can't kill anything either unless it's over an abyss by freezing it. Rocket artillery is an excellent complement to the ice mech, and some kind of alternative damage option for the prime is recommended, such as a rocket launcher or a rocket fist. The Hazardous mechs are a different twist on our usual squad allotment, like the Blitzkrieg do very poorly with protection missions and defensive operations. However, they are also a lot of fun and are more or less an all-in on damage. The first power core I throw into the first damage upgrade on the Leap Prime. This helps him be more useful. He's basically leaping artillery, so position him like artillery initially in your backline but move forward as available. Make sure to kill something every time with him, otherwise he will pass out. When the first island is done, I throw the 3 power cores into damage for the unstable mech to help him be more useful. Preferred time travel would be Kazakhlapeth or Herald on the nano mech with the hit point upgrade so they can block better. When the second island has come, I throw the first power core into movement on the unstable mech. Then at the end of the second island, I upgrade damage on the prime. Swap the Viscera nanobots to one of the other mechs, usually the prime, and keep an eye out for self-destruct to toss into the nano mech. Simply see a problem, fly over to the middle of the problem, press the button, kill them all, and then come back alive. Unless you get Abe or fully upgrade Viscera nanobots, do not get the +1 damage each upgrade on the unstable mech. In complete contrast to the other crews, the Secret Squad is one that I never really figured out. They are really tough to use and upgrades are painful. The Beetle mech is basically a charge mech from the Zenith Guard. The Hornet is pretty awesome once upgraded, and the Scarab mech is basically Armitage artillery from the Riftwalkers without buildings immune. Hit points on the Hornet is an important upgrade so he can block if necessary. Beyond that, I can only invite you to submit your successful upgrade path in the comments for this video, and I would be happy to explore them, but they are not a reliable squad. As for what comes out very soon for pilots and mechs, I'm very excited to see what they can do, but this video is being produced before that happens, so hopefully some of those suggestions can carry over to what is flowing down the river. Now let's talk about initial setup and positioning. This is a difficult subject to talk about for a variety of reasons. People have their own styles of play, different mission difficulty, different victory conditions, different mechs with different levels of equipment and abilities, and so there's a huge degree of possibilities to deal with. And maybe that's just what we want in this game. It does have a surprising amount of replayability after all. Therefore, I believe the best approach is to give some general guidelines and 2 setup scenarios from each squad in the game, while hopefully also covering all the different types of mission objectives or scenarios to deal with. Let's get right to it. For some general guidelines, it's important to remember that the mech are coded in such a way such that they will try to attack something each turn individually, and that factor can be exploited. If a Firefly can move only 3 positions on, say, the 2 rank, and he has a choice of attacking a building, another building, or your mech, then he has a 33% chance of attacking you and a 66% chance of attacking a building. However, if your mech wasn't there, then he has a 100% chance of attacking a building. So you can position mechs on files where enemies like fireflies might attack your mechs, which are going to move anyways, and thus is one less enemy that you will have to deal with this turn, although you might choose to deal with it anyways. You will generally want to put artillery on the back rank, whichever spot has the most lateral mobility. Prime and brute mechs like to be up front for the most part, and most science mechs, especially with pilots like Harold or Kazaklopeth, will like to be up front too. You want to figure out how you can get the most from each mech each turn, but also generally each mech should be able to do something each turn, such as killing something, blocking a spawn, reposition something to kill something else, and so on. The more effective actions you can get from the mech, the more efficient it becomes. For instance, if you can kill 3 enemies in one turn with just 1 mech, that's pretty efficient, which what the steel judoka is known for with the siege artillery, and the lightning mech from the Blitzkrieg squad is known for as well. If you have an action that means you can block and get an enemy to block with you while not damaging something important, that's also more efficient than just one action, which would be blocking the spawn by yourself. This is not always possible, and the most efficient move is not always the best one, but it usually is. You want to think about what the enemy might do, and how can I respond to that? Consider a game of chess. If your opponent has 4 pieces that they could move, and it's early mid-game, they might be able to move a pawn, move a bishop to there, a knight to here or there, or a queen to some other spot. In each of those possibilities, what response is appropriate, and how does that affect the outcome a few turns down the line? So when you place your mechs, you want to think about what the enemy could do and how you could best respond to that. Like chess, the early game tends to define the pace of the game, and you want to grab that control early. And like chess, controlling the middle 4 squares tends to be a good idea, while also controlling the initiative is a huge part of the game. If you can make your opponent respond to your actions rather than you responding to his actions, which puts you in the defensive in most cases, then you have a higher chance of winning the game. You can set up or bait enemies to make particular moves. If you know a scorpion can reach you and you can kill him with that mech, you may elect to position him that he attacks, or you could set up just outside his reach so that you're closer to him and can knock him out your own way. Blobbers can be baited with mechs arranged in a certain way. Burrows can be baited with a line of mechs. Remember that hostile behavior does have a certain element where it may choose the less optimal move, so it's not guaranteed, but it's a lot better odds than not trying. With that out of the way, let's have a look at some scenarios to go over so you can understand the thinking here. Remember that hindsight is usually really solid, and different people have different actions, so I may not always choose the best move, but I generally try to. We'll have a look at each one of the 8 primary crews and 16 different missions to hopefully cover most of the possibilities that you may encounter. Starting with the Rift Walkers here, my primary consideration is the Alpha Spider on D3, the Alpha Centipede on E3, and the Alpha Hornet on D2. The Shell Scion isn't going to make things any better. On top of that, we have a building up front and 2 NPC robots. There's a few things you can do here, and it depends on what the spider does. You can either position your mechs in a fashion to bait the spider into a position to web you in such a way that is favorable, or you can go the opposite way and position in a way that nobody gets webbed. Let's see what happens from that. Great, the spider got frozen. Not bad. We just need to nuke the alpha enemies in the middle, dunk the Shell Scion, and the Scarab can be ignored for now. In this next mission, we have an objective to freeze and protect the robots, which helpfully are also very hostile to us. If I put my mechs in a nice line on the 5 rank, this can bait the artillery bot to attack them, as he wants to attack multiple targets if possible. He does, however, have the option of attacking a row of buildings on the 7 rank, so he has a 25% chance of doing that, or going to some spot on the D file and attacking the rows of the buildings on the G file or A file. I will happily take my chances with a row of mechs, so that way the freeze tank is freed up to freeze the other bot in case he's attacking a building. In the case the artillery robot is not attacking my mechs, there is a chance that the cannon bot might attack my mechs or freeze tank on the D and E files, which could be ignored. The Alpha Centipede and Leaper could make this interesting. Let's see what happens. So Bethany will eat a shot from the cannon bot, but it's okay. She took out 2 enemies by herself, leaving the other mechs lots of options to grab the initiative and stay ahead. Train missions. They always like to say don't do train missions. I do them all the time, and considering I have more clean sweeps of them than failures, I'm going to keep doing them. But with the Blitzkrieg and the Hazardous mechs, I typically avoid them unless I have alternative defensive or offensive options. In this one, we have a tunnel at the end. We want to make sure the Vec don't get back there, especially diggers. They can be difficult to deal with. I like to put a mech that can push on C5 to respond to attacks in the immediate vicinity of the train, prioritize blocking, and keep the fight in the 1, 2, and 3 ranks. I know I can't do much about the Centipede, but the Fireflies I can bait into attacking down the D and F files, and the Jet has a good chance of being able to attack something and block afterwards. You will probably see a lot of pods in these examples. It just so happens that most of the missions I wanted to share with you had pods. And it looks like this result is not too bad. This can be dealt with many ways. On to the next one. Defend the factories missions can be a little tricky to deal with because you get a robot kicked out of the factory every turn, just like the enemies launching out of the acid pools in Detritus. A better spot for the artillery would have been F5. This would bait the spider to launch an egg onto F6, which means the artillery can kill the spider and the egg in one action. Backburn on the Vulcan artillery can do that too, but as the damage upgrade on the Vulcan artillery is frequently a liability, it doesn't work as well as rocket artillery. The jet mech is also good for baiting because if he gets webbed by a leaper or something, he can usually get away every time. In this mission here, I elected for a more conservative approach because I was thinking about the robot, but in hindsight, the spider is probably the greater threat. Blocking missions should not be too difficult most of the time unless you're playing as the Hazardous mechs. Their self-damage means blocking with them is often very difficult. With this crew, the Brute should not be blocking at all unless he's Abe with a hit point bonus. Now I know the Digger is going to go on an attack on either F2, somewhere on the G file or E file, so I'm going to position this laser mech so he can respond to attack on either side. F5 would probably been a better spot, but I wanted the extra movement in case he's stuck on F2. The Firefly has a 20% chance that he will attack my mechs, and the Alpha Hornet has a 16% chance that he will attack my mechs versus attacking the row of buildings on the B file or F file. Let's see how this worked out. Ah, right. This is manageable. Missions to kill 7 enemies is a common objective. However, if that is paired up with terrain that changes like this one, you want to make sure that you don't block, because that can limit the enemy count such that you may not have enough effect to kill. In this scenario, the Scorpion on F2 is probably the biggest threat. If he gets to the corner of G5, which is not likely, then he can be difficult to deal with if your damage is low, for example with the flaming behemoths. Another thing to mention is that the ice mech from Frozen Titans can freeze flying enemies over abyss tiles, which kills them, but don't freeze yourself over an abyss tile, as that will kill the mech. Anyways, the Alpha Digger can be pressed into attacking if a mech is parked on C5. One of the Fireflies can be baited into attacking down the E file. This is fine. The Firefly bait didn't work, but we will be okay. Oh yeah, acid launcher missions. We always do these missions, high threat level or not. The Hornets could be a problem, as they can more or less do whatever they want. The Blobber, we will know, will most likely launch a blob to B5 or D5. What I want to do this time is set up my mechs in such a way that the acid launcher can take out as many of them as possible, using the plus pattern to full advantage. And another time pod to make my ideas more difficult. We'll be fine. The lightning mech can take out a few of these problems. 2 of the VEC can be straight up ignored for now. Dam missions can be a problem for the flaming behemoths, as they don't have any direct damage right out the door, which is why Kazakhlapeth is a key pilot for them in the swap mech. In this example, I know the Alpha Spider can drop an egg onto E5, which is what I want him to do, because the Prime Spear can blow the dam from its current position, and Camellia is in the pilot seat. Oh, and there's a pod. Great. Anyways, not too much to mention about this mission, because there's no enemies besides the spider that can web, and thus I'm going to position them in a way that keeps them flexible. Could have at least tried to bait one of the Alpha Hornets though. And for those who make fun of me for not playing hard, I did complete this with no failures. However, it got pretty busy, which is why my mechs have a fair bit of damage, as they had to block a lot of damage that would have otherwise gone to the grid. So it's not that I don't like hard missions, it is I don't like it all the time. I mean, I have one hard on all 28 cruisers in FTL, which, according to Steam, only 7.6% of players have even one on normal. Now, the Volatile Vec mission is one that can be a little tricky, but the Frozen Titans do pretty well because the Ice Mech can simply freeze him and then go about other things. Usually though, you end up being forced to babysit him with a mech to just move him around or bait him into focusing on your mechs. Harold is a great choice for that if you can get him on your crew, as he can push him away all day long, unless he gets into a corner. On this board, the crabs can be baited into attacking down the C, D, and E files, and the Firefly might join in on that too, but we will have to dedicate a mech to babysitting the Volatile Vec. If you note, there's a secret pod location on H1. I didn't notice it until the end of the mission, but I would not have been able to get it anyways. The Earth Mover mission is commonly cited by many as a prime example of the superiority of the steel judoka artillery. In my experience, pretty much all the crews can deal with its challenges just fine. Enemies don't always conveniently crowd the Earth Mover, and the 4-tile attack really only works on their first turn when there's some abyss nearby. But anyways, in this mission, I know that one of my mechs is going to get webbed by this spider. The Firefly could potentially be baited down the C file, which does have a 20% chance that can happen. Given that I had to block in this mission too, I elected not to get Harold potentially webbed, as he has 5 movement and could be very important for this mission. After all, you don't want to get yourself in a situation where all 3 of your mechs get webbed. I should have lined up my mechs on the E file instead, but I was unable to gain the initiative to be able to block as a consequence. This map can be very tricky to deal with because the water in the backline means the artillery has a harder time than normal, which isn't a problem if you have Prospero in your artillery. Keeping the battle up front is a must, as flying enemies like to get to the backline and cause trouble. In this scenario, I wanted to position the artillery so he has the most mobility, and considered deploying to the F5 square and play along the F file, but decided against it. As the Prime happens to have Rocket Fist, the Hornet can be dealt with, but the Scion blocking my front line axis is also an issue. It is also possible to swap the acid vaults in front of the Vec attacks to have them destroy them for you. These missions with an objective to break buildings out of ice often come with a side objective, killing Vec or blocking spawns. In both cases, you have to carefully control Vec count because you need their help in knocking off ice. If you don't block enough or don't kill enough, then you can get overwhelmed. If you overblock or kill too much, then you may not get enough ice taken care of. So these missions can be a fun challenge. For this one, I'm not worried about deployment too much other than to get my mech centralized to control the board, and one mech will have to be set aside to block 1 square each turn to meet mission objectives. In some cases, you can take out 2 objectives in 1 turn by push killing an enemy into an iced building. The terraformer can be used for ally on more difficult missions. In this scenario, it is pretty simple to work out a starting solution. If I put my mechs on G5, D6, or E6, then I can bait enemies into attacking while using the terraformer to take them out. Generally, this mission is fairly straightforward, but is played a bit differently than the others. But in contrast to that, the satellite launchers are a bit trickier, especially if the time pod drops in their launch kill zone. For this deployment here, the Hornet is fully capable of going to F5. In fact, I want him to do that, so that positioning a mech that can kill him readily is a good idea. This is the first mission in a run, so the enemies are pretty tame, but we want to make sure that things don't get out of hand. Remember if you freeze a satellite, the objective for that can fail because the launch is part of the objective, and it can't launch if it's frozen. They have 2 hit points, like the acid launcher, earth mover, and terraforming unit, so if you need to let it tank a 1 damage hit once, that is fine. One mission that is a bit more tricky is one where an objective is to destroy 2 mountains. It is usually paired with kill 7 enemies too, so a lot of crews have a hard time with it. In this drop here, I know that the digger is going to go to B2, C2, or D3. It's a matter of which mech is going to be best suited for dealing with him, and given that the Prime can't deal with him alone, it's going to be a case of a 2 mech job. However, I probably could bait one of the other enemies into not attacking grid, so that would free up 1 mech to deal with him. Oh great, this isn't too bad. The steel judoka, however, is great for this mission because 1 shot can take out 2 nearby cracked mountain tiles. Other options include getting the Vec to destroy them for you, or bopping enemies into said tiles to get 2 actions out of 1 turn. The last mission I have is this one here with the acid tank. Generally, you want to paint 1 enemy with acid each turn, whether you kill them or not, to make sure that there's 4 painted enemies or more. In this mission, there's 3 high mobility enemies, so as the hazardous mechs aren't all that great with defensive options, our starting positions need to be such that we can respond with attacks that don't damage grid. While I can't cover all scenarios, and I won't profess to be an expert on the subject, I'm hoping that these examples help give some idea of the thought process involved. Each scenario is different, so there's no one solution for all. Let's move on to blocking, and how we can use that to our advantage. Like starting positions, this is a difficult topic to showcase and discuss due to the huge amount of variables at work. To start off, I recommend having a read of these excellent posts on Reddit by a certain Smog Alado. He breaks down the logic used to determine Vec spawns and a few other topics. A link will be in the description. It really is nice to have some insight on how spawns work and so on. I recommend reading his post as it gives you some insight as to what you're dealing with. The game does have safeguards in place to avoid really bad setups, something that Deep Rock Galactic could probably take a page from. You got shield disruption plus Swarmageddon on Hollow Ball? That's rough. But you still have to do your part. High threat level on hard, Island 4 with a train mission? Good luck. If a mission objective requires you to block, then naturally you have to. In this case, a square must be blocked for each successive turn. The square can be blocked by your mechs, your mech-launched tanks, rocks from rock launchers, acid vats, or in best case, the enemy. As turn efficiency is a big deal on harder missions and higher difficulty levels, if you can block, you generally should, as blocking reduces or controls the enemies on field, meaning that you can start to gain the upper hand and gain the initiative. The game computes how many spawns based on the active number of VEC on the field, among other things, so you must evaluate the overall field to see when it is appropriate to do so. If there is 1 VEC on the field and the game wants to spawn 5 VEC, then you should absolutely block 2 spawns, otherwise you'll have 5 VEC to deal with next turn, and most crews aren't very good at dealing with that, especially in the early game. While you can't always know what is coming up from any one square, you can infer it. If you have always blocked 1 spawn and you never saw the scion, then it's safe to say that the square that you're currently blocking has a scion under it. With that in mind, especially on hard, it is better to block a square than to try to deal with killing 5 hit point alpha VEC, which can often require 2 mechs to deal with. The rebound effect happens when the situation occurs where blocking happens early, but then you get forced off those squares that are blocking the enemy, and suddenly all the enemies that you were blocking plus the other ones that already are there spawn all at once. It usually happens with 2 turns left to go. Keep an eye out for this. It's generally considered appropriate to control the VEC count on the field at any one time to 3 at most. Most crews can deal with 1 VEC each, with some doing more, such as the ice mech that can freeze himself on a spawn square and freeze an enemy in the distance, and the ice prevents him from taking some damage from blocking but also frees him for next turn, which is why the Zoltan isn't as good. So if it's possible to cap VEC to prevent being overwhelmed, do so. Some crews like the Flame Behemoths rely on blocking because their initial damage output is bad. You can see in this situation the result of not blocking. There are now 6 enemies on field, 3 of my mechs, a train conveniently going down the middle, and 7 buildings with people watching. This is not a good situation to be in, and was the result of being unable to block. On top of that, the C3 and D3 squares, if enemies get there, can get deadly. The ice mech is easier to use with Herald or Mantis in the pilot seat, and here you can see the ability to conduct 2 actions in 1 turn, by freezing self over a spawn tile while protective freezing a building tile. Blocking hard with 2 turns left is generally considered good. The reason is that it is the last turn that enemies can spawn, so if blocking is done well, there will be only a few enemies to worry about for the last turn of the map. Herald is great for blocking because his special repair ability can be used to force off melee range enemies away from him, and Archimedes does exceptional work in the Aegis mech of the Frozen Titans, where he can attack something, gain a shield, and then reposition to block a spawn. But that could also be a hostile VEC, a friendly about to take damage, another mech blocking with it, and so on. Tanks with hit point upgrades can make great blocking companions. If you decide early on that blocking is going to be your central strategy, then you must commit to it fully. This is often a strategy integral to crews with either low damage output like the Flaming Behemoths, or ones that are lacking in defensive options like the Blitzkrieg squad. Certain missions lend themselves to doing so, such as this one with a volatile VEC. I chose a full-on blocking approach because not doing so would have forced me into a less favorable situation by having to kill other Vec while babysitting the volatile Vec. This mission here can be spicy because of the usual hornet swarm that comes out of the abyss that can overwhelm weak crews. While blocking over the abyss is possible with a flying mech of your own, or rarely, an enemy Vec, if it does happen, the game will simply spawn a normal ground tile in the usual fashion. The lightning mech is a great match for this map, and the fully upgraded steel judoka artillery delights in this mission. However, most crews should be very wary of it. Another mission that can be spooky is this one from Detritus. It has many problems: a cramped backline, buildings up front and in the middle, usually has enemies that spawn from the acid pools, and it can be difficult to block and gain control of the board. I would generally recommend avoiding this mission, especially if it is a Island 4 for a run. On the last mission of any one island, the presence of a boss typically means blocking at least one square is required, especially with the spider leader and the goo quote-unquote boss. These enemies can crowd the field with smaller enemies or entities. Combined with normal Vex spawns can be overwhelming. Fully upgraded missile barrage can be a way out sometimes, but that's not always an option. The Scion Abomination has to be taken out hard and fast before other options can be taken out next to buildings, and the bot leader, while uncommon, also requires a lot of damage up front to knock out quickly. Blocking is a way of buying time to deal with these kinds of threats. In particular, if the bot leader takes damage, it fires its artillery rockets, repositions, puts up a shield, and then goes into repair mode for next turn, which fully repairs all damage taken. The Scorpion Leader is a dangerous foe that can be difficult to deal with, but the Firefly and Hornet Leader are not as dangerous, and frequently I like to goof off with the Beetle Leader as he is not that scary. I really hope you found all this information useful in this video, and hope that you have many enjoyable hours playing this game. I too will be playing it a while into the future, and some things are just too satisfying to pass up. Similar things I will miss is rocket jumping in Team Fortress 2, the Ogre machine gun in Borderlands 1, the Jacob's Coach gun in Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, extra large ancillary shield boosters on cruisers in EVE Online, and as of right now, the M1000 Classic in Deep Rock Galactic. Thanks for watching.